Good evening and welcome to another episode of Late Night with Lenette. I'm the Honorable Lenette Peterson, former state rep for Merrimack, as your host. I'm changing the format to the show just a little bit tonight. Usually we start with a Maggie moment and discuss our illustrious governor. Well, basically the whole show is going to be a Maggie moment thanks to a despicable veto by our governor. We're going to start with a Hillary happening, and there's plenty from Hillary to keep us informed. Why do the Clintons think that they are above the law? What gives them the right? They think that they're above regulations. When is this going to stop? This entitlement that they believe they have is wrong. I'm talking about foreign aid. Their foreign, let's say, funds that are going into the Clinton Foundation. The list of foreign countries is mind-boggling. The worst and the most shocking, uranium, key ingredient in nuclear weapons. It's a known fact the U.S. mines uranium. Would you believe, as our illustrious Secretary of State, charming Hillary Clinton, made a deal? She cut a deal with the Russians, with uranium. Her wonderful husband, lousy speaker that he is, all of a sudden he's getting paid huge big bucks. Clinton cut a deal with a Russian businessman for, get this, $2.35 million for uranium to be delivered to our wonderful neighbors across the coast, the Russians. What is she thinking? If she makes shady deals like this as Secretary of State, can you imagine what she's going to do as president? We don't need Hillary. Say no to uranium and say no to Hillary. My show tonight is going to be very interesting. We have with us the one and only Ann Marie Banfield. Oh my word, I can't believe I did that. What did I get? Ann Marie Banfield from Cornerstone. She is their education liaison, and we are discussing the governor's veto of Senate Bill 101, Common Core Standards. Welcome to Late Night with Lenette.
Thanks for having me.
I can't believe I did that to your name. Well, last show, one of my shows, I forgot what kind of bike I rode. So it comes with the territory, I guess. Go. What do you think of the illustrious governor and her veto?
I think it is a clear indication that Governor Hassan and primarily the Democrats in the state are not willing to listen to parents. I think that you need no more evidence right now to know that your governor, who is serving the state of New Hampshire, is not concerned about what the parents want in their public schools.
There you go. I have an article from, and I'm probably going to butcher her name, Diane Secula. Is that how you say it?
Yes.
She lives in Londonderry. I know she lives in Londonderry, and she's a teacher in Hooksett. And she had, I don't know if this was an op-ed, I got it off the line.
Yes.
With the union leader discussing Common Core. Now, she talks about how there was a point made that this is just a Republican thing. This is just what Republicans want. This woman is a Democrat. She's a Democrat, she's a teacher, and she's a parent. And in her letter, she points out that Governor Hassan is a strong supporter of Common Core. I mean, duh, we know that. However, the governor is vice chair of the National Governors Association's Education and Workforce Committee, a nonprofit special interest group that controls what?
Education.
And Common Core
Yes.
standards. This
Yes.
is what the governor, hello, talk about a conflict of interest.
Yes.
This just steams my clams.
Well, I mean, I know about Diane. She has just recently started speaking out on Common Core, and because of what she sees going on in her classroom. And I think that she speaks for many teachers. The only difference is she really has the courage to take this information public, whereas many of the teachers, and I don't want to say that they're not being courageous, they are being intimidated and they are being bullied into not speaking up. And she has shown real courage. But I also believe that she's leaving the teaching profession over this. So, you know, if she's going to leave the teaching profession, if this is driving her out, and it's driving many teachers out of the teaching profession, I am so grateful that she's speaking up. And she's doing it not just as a teacher, but also a parent, because she sees what's going on with her own kids in the school, and is saying, you know what, this is wrong. And parents better start listening, because the teachers who are speaking up are really, there's a letter from another teacher, and I think it's in fosters.com today, just basically saying the same thing. He's from York, Maine. So if anybody wants to go Google that and start listening to what these teachers are saying is going on in the classroom. Everything is becoming very scripted. It's all about teaching to a test. And I can tell you that the tests, the Common Core tests, are so flawed and they're so bad that it's one thing to teach to a quality test. This isn't even a good test. And then what the results are going to be with the testing results is that the focus is to now use them against schools, which was done under No Child Left Behind, but under Common Core, the target has become the teachers. So they have a target on their back, make no mistake about it, because that's what we are seeing from the U.S. Department of Education. They want their evaluations, the teachers and the principal evaluations, tied to these tests and tied to student performance, and they're saying, we've got a problem, not because they want to be evaluated or not be evaluated in this way, but because there is a problem with the standards, there's a problem with the testing, and now you want to tie my evaluation to something. You gave this to us. This is a completely flawed reform program with flawed tests, and you want to how about we start evaluating the bureaucrats and those people that came up with these ideas? Wouldn't it be nice to evaluate the U.S. Secretary of Education based on public outrage to his reform ideas? Wouldn't that be nice?
I think they just ought to abolish the whole Department of Education to
Yes.
start with. Give the control back to the states.
Yes.
Let the states handle it. Oh, don't even get me going on D.C. Yeah, and she mentions here in her letter about the testing. Now, she worked with the Peace Corps and worked in places like Moldova and the Soviet Union,
Yes.
and compares this to how teaching was in the Soviet Union. Yeah, you didn't teach to each individual, you taught as a group, and
Yes.
and she even said that she was told, oh, don't bother with him, he can't do it. So you just didn't bother. It's disturbing, some of the things she writes. She says, here's a quote from the governor. Governor Hassan is quoted as saying, as this bill has no practical impact, its purpose appears to be that of sending a message, and it's the wrong message.
Right. So let's explain what the message was in SB 101, because I think that's important. And maybe we can read that quote again after we explain it. Because SB 101 just specifically clarifies that schools do not have to use Common Core standards. And that pretty much is what we have right now anyway. Schools do not have to use the standards. They can develop their own standards. But what parents have run into is if they go to their school boards and they say, we want to use better standards. These are not internationally benchmarked to the highest performing countries. They're not even up to the level of state standards we saw before Common Core. So we have these proven standards, let's say from Massachusetts, they're old ones, where the students were performing highest in the country. We want to use those standards, and that's what Wakefield, New Hampshire did. What they're running into is they're running into resistance. So, they're being told, well, we can't use different standards because this is what the Department of Education adopted, and, this is a mandate. So we're getting all kinds of conflicting information, and parents would like to, make that become an advocate for their school, become an advocate for their children, and they're running into resistance. SB 101, all it did was clarify in law that schools do not have to use the Common Core standards. Now, they can choose to use them, or they can use something else. It's just clarifying it in law. So I think maybe we should read again what the governor said, why this isn't needed.
Right, and then her quote again, as this bill has no practical impact, its purpose appears to be that of sending a message, and it's the wrong message.
Right. So I think it's also important to go back. let's go back to HB 1508, which was your bill.
Right. Yep.
And we had many parents come in. It was basically the same thing. Or yours was actually to stop the Common Core standards.
Correct.
We had parent after parent coming in and saying, here's what we're seeing in the classroom. We don't like this. We want something better. It was voted down in the House, right? So it never even made it to the Senate because it was Democrats in control back then. So this year, SB 101, again, clarifies that schools don't have to use Common Core standards, did pass the House and it did pass the Senate. And the reason it did is because parents, again, showed up in overwhelming numbers to say, pass this law. We don't like what we're seeing. We want some kind of avenue to bring in better standards. And so the people listened, the people in the House and the people in the Senate, although I do have to say that if you want to know specifically how your state rep voted, I would go and check the roll call votes on that, because there were just a couple Republicans that voted against it. But I think all the Democrats pretty much voted against parents, and all the Republicans supported parents on this except for a couple. So you have the governor just making a statement that this is not needed. Well, if it's not needed, then why were so many parents showing up? There's a petition, there's an online petition right now that has like 1,500 signatures saying get us out of Common Core. We have a Facebook page that says Stop Common Core New Hampshire. There's almost 3,000 people that have liked that page. I represent Cornerstone, but there are other organizations, New Hampshire Families for Education and the Liberty Alliance, who is represented by Michelle Lavelle, and New Hampshire Families for Education represented by Doris Hohensee. The three of us have worked kind of in conjunction with parents across the state to bring their voices to the legislature. We will let them know that this bill is up for hearing, and they're coming out and they're saying, we don't want this, and yet nobody's listening. And the governor's not listening, I should say, because clearly some of the legislators are listening, and I'm very grateful to them.
Oh yeah, it was great that getting it to pass the House, that was probably a given with the Republican majority. It was probably a given. But to pass the Senate, that was huge. And we have a slim majority, and then to have it fall on her desk and her veto it.
Yeah.
I mean, she clearly is not for New Hampshire parents.
Right.
Not by far. Couple other quotes she has. And she said that, I forgot her name already. Diane.
Yep.
Diane says that I am furthermore very disappointed, discouraged, and angered. As a parent and teacher, I see the negative impact of Common Core on a daily basis. New Hampshire should be offering its public school children a proven curriculum, not Common Core. And she mentions that this is not, Common Core standards are not being used at, what she listed a couple schools.
The private schools.
The private schools, yes. Here is the Derryfield School and Phillips Exeter Academy. And gee, doesn't the governor's husband work for Phillips Exeter?
Yeah, the feeder into the Ivy League schools. The elite private schools won't touch Common Core.
Yeah, exactly.
Their parents will not tolerate paying that kind of tuition for dumbed down, mediocre standards where teachers are being scripted now. I mean, I like her quote. I think what she says about those schools, I think is a great quote if you've got it there.
Let's see. However, I'm sure that although Governor Hassan has no teaching experience, Common Core and its associated testing have been shrouded in secrecy and require data collection, the likes of which have never before been in America. Standardized testing companies and executives are making billions of dollars off this transformation. The Derryfield School refers to Common Core as inferior, and Phillips Exeter Academy will never use Common Core. But the governor believes everything is just fine, and we should continue the path we are on. Clearly, the governor knows better than I. Yes. Conflict of interest. She is looking out for her little self as the vice chair. She's not thinking of New Hampshire students. Now, I'm a substitute teacher in a different town. I don't sub in Merrimack because I don't want to see my tax dollars at waste. And you've seen what the Merrimack school budget is like. The nation has. We won't go there. That's a whole show in itself. But something as a substitute teacher, 5th grade, I'll never forget it. I'm looking through what my agenda for the day was, and there was a line drawn through science. There was going to be no science that day. And I read what the teacher wrote, and she said because of the math that day, science was covered in math. So I quickly went to the Common Core math book, and I read our assignment for the day. 2 of the word problems each had 2 scientific terms in it. That was science for the day for a 5th grader.
Yeah.
It was horrible.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. It refines down the curriculum. There's a national test that is done annually. It's called the Nite, and the scores just came out on civics, social studies, and I think I'm not sure what the grade. It might be 8th grade. I could be wrong about this, but 18% of our students were proficient in social studies or civics. And because when you have this focus on teaching to the test and teaching only the Common Core and teaching it this way and things like that, and now you're saying teachers are going to be evaluated on this. I mean, they're going to prioritize it. This is what they're going to be forced to do. The chief architect, David Coleman, who now runs the College Board and has aligned the SATs and the ACTs to Common Core, is on videotape of saying that there's no power that's going to be able to prevent this alignment in this narrow curriculum. Those are not his exact words. I'm paraphrasing here, but you can see it. You can see it happening. I mean, but I think that the people that support Common Core, like Bill Gates, he's the one who says he doesn't want liberal arts education. He wants it defined, and unfortunately, I think that's what we're getting. It's interesting. Steve Jobs argued against Bill Gates and argued for liberal arts because it is an academic-based quality education in all the subjects.
And they are also, correct me if I'm wrong, they're not going to teach social studies anymore with Common Core because they say what you get in language arts covers social studies.
For now, we did see a set of national social studies standards, and I believe they got the foundation of the government incorrect in those standards. So
doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, and I found them on the Amherst School District's website. So it looks like they are already looking at them and referencing them possibly in the school. So they haven't come forefront in New Hampshire yet, so I haven't delved into them yet, but the science standards are next, the next generation science standards. They're the national, basically Common Core science standards that are up next, and we can see the writing on the wall. The Department of Education has already started referencing this in their documentation, and in some of the schools are already using it with no debate, nothing. They're starting to look at them at the Board of Education level, but I've looked at what the Board of Education has been saying about them. It's almost as if they want them, and now they're going to go through this formality of listening to a few people, and then they're going to make their decision. I think the writing's on the wall. They're going to adopt the next generation science standards, another set of dumbed down science standards. We have the old California standards, which were developed by like a leading Nobel Prize winner. No, we're not going to use those. We're going to use these new next generation science standards. They don't even have chemistry in the next generation science standards. That's what we're going to get.
Wow.
Mark my words.
Now, is Common Core the reason that they're taking cursive writing out of public schools?
I think that's been around for a while because even under No Child Left Behind, you can see the narrowing, and so if it's not tested now, it's a lot of times it's just removed.
And that's a shame. You think when you give a child a crayon or a pencil when they're first getting into stuff like that, what's the first thing they do? They do things like this.
Yeah.
My 2 daughters grew up going to private schools, not elite private schools, Christian schools.
Yeah.
Very, very affordable Christian schools. They were taught cursive writing in kindergarten.
Yeah, same with my kids.
Yeah, they learn cursive first, then they learn printing because it's a natural motion. When they get crayons, they scribble. They make loops. They don't make the stick figures that you need for printing.
Yep. And it's not in the Common Core standards. So a lot of schools will continue not to teach cursive because it's not in the standards, it's not going to be tested, and we need to make sure. Now, I think some schools will go above and beyond. I mean, they're going to do some things, but as you test and as you test and as you punish down the road, that could very well easily be eliminated if let's say the Common Core math scores aren't doing well. Well, we need to focus more on that. So that's the danger in this. So while you may have it now, the problem is it could be eliminated in the future because of this punishment kind of scheme. I think a better approach, because I think it's one thing to criticize, it's also helpful to say, what would you do? What could we do that's better? Well, number one, we can use a set of internationally benchmarked standards, and those have been identified, and they're not the Common Core standards, and they're academic based. We could make them voluntary. You don't have to force them upon schools. You don't have to, coerce and bribe schools. You simply say, here's a good set of standards. Parents, if this is what you want for your schools, you better get in there and you better fight for that at the local level. Then what you can do is you can have an achievement test, an independent achievement test that measures how your kids are doing in the school. And you're going to find that, you mentioned Christian schools, this is pretty much how they do it in the private schools.
Exactly.
Then you get the results back. You look at it as a parent and you say, uh-oh, you know what, the scores aren't so good, I'm going to go talk to the principal. Or you get the scores back and you say, you know what, my kid's pretty lazy this year. The scores are down, but you know what, it's my kid's problem. I'm not going to blame a teacher. I'm not going to blame a school. I'm going to, give my kid a swift kick in the butt.
Yep.
You give it back to the parents who kind of understand what's going on. If there's a problem going on in the class, they can say, see, this is why, we need to change out the curriculum or something like that. So you make it where the parents are the ones who hold the schools accountable in some way. And so that's kind of what I think that we're missing is the parental, right now the way this system is set up, schools and teachers are answering to unnamed, no-face bureaucrats, because they're the ones who are now controlling this. They're controlling the money. If you don't do it this way, we're going to withhold funding. I mean, how many times have we heard it this year? If you don't do it this way, you run the risk of losing federal funding. Oftentimes, we're finding that the feds are not withholding that money, but there's a lot of threatening going on right now.
Right. Oh, yeah. Huge threatening. And everything has to do with the almighty dollar.
Yes.
Yes. You do things this way or you lose funding. You do this or you lose funding. Seatbelts. New Hampshire's probably the only state that it's not mandatory seatbelts. Sometimes the funding just isn't worth it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And those are good questions as we go into the presidential election, campaign. Cut the strings. It's our money. You're coercing us and you're bribing us with our money and you're telling us what to do with our schools with our money, and we have no say over it. So cut that out. And you brought up earlier, abolish the Federal Department of Education. Think of all that money that they're wasting in Washington, D.C. that could be spent in your local classrooms. I mean, I know that's a scary thought for some parents out there. Oh my gosh, but keep in mind, we have a New Hampshire Department of Education. You have your local school board. These are people that are accessible, that you can go to if you don't like what's going on. You can't go. Who are you going to go to in Washington, D.C.? I mean, they don't listen to you anyway.
No, they're unapproachable.
Yeah, so abolish the Department of Education or get rid of whatever's going on there. And you're going to see a lot more control amongst parents, and you can go in and you can say, I don't like this curriculum, and then you have to worry about them saying, well, the curriculum aligns to this test, which aligns to the Common Core, and this is what the federal government said we should do. You have a lot more control going on in your school.
And some of the testing doesn't have to do with education.
No.
Some of the questions, they get quite personal.
Right. Well, I think there's this big opt-out movement right now, and it's over the Smarter Balanced Assessment, which is being given in all schools throughout New Hampshire this month. And as I've looked at the assessment, as I looked at other people's judgment, this is, again, an assessment. It's not a test. It's not an achievement test. So it's not going to test academic knowledge. This is a psychometric assessment, which means it's going to assess their values, their attitudes, their beliefs, those kind of things based on the questions that they ask. The problem with that is, and I think a great example is, There's a child psychologist in Utah. His name is Dr. Gary Thompson, and you can actually bring up a YouTube video where he testified in front of the Wisconsin legislature. He's a child psychologist. He's a licensed medical professional, and he has analyzed this assessment, and he basically says, you know, this is a psychometric assessment, and if I gave this in my clinic to somebody's child, I would have to get their informed consent, or I would lose my medical license. How many parents were asked, please, this is what we are doing to your child, this is the kind of assessment we are giving them, we want you to be fully informed, and we want your consent? No parents have been given. No. And yet a child psychologist would lose his medical license if he did what your schools are doing right now to your children.
Right. And some schools have taken it upon themselves that the kids that don't opt out, they get a prize for the day.
Right.
If you opt out, you get no prize.
Right.
So they're making it so kids will want to take the test.
Yes.
They'll go against their parents. They won't tell their parents. If they are given a letter to tell their parents, oh, we're going to be doing this, they're going to hide that. They know they're going to get a prize.
Right. I mean, we've heard from parents that had to get an attorney involved just to opt their kids out of this assessment, which they have every right to do. They have to push back to their schools. And why? Because their schools have been threatened. If you don't meet a certain percentage, you run the risk of losing funding. Again, it always boils down to money, not what's best for your child. We had the Nashua teachers on record probably about a year ago. There was an article in the Nashua Telegraph where the teachers were so alarmed by what they saw in these assessments. One teacher said this is more like a psychological, sociological assessment than it is an achievement test. Well, exactly. And you know, the other teacher was quoted as saying, this is child abuse for my special ed students. Dr. Gary Thompson has called this cognitive child abuse. And yet, this is what our governor supports in our schools. And I'm actually kind of surprised too that school administrators haven't begun. Superintendents really should be saying this is wrong.
Right. I remember seeing that article in the Nashua Telegraph, and it's deplorable.
Yes.
Absolutely deplorable. And why the governor would support something like this and just completely turn her back on New Hampshire parents.
Yeah.
And she wants to go and represent us in Washington, D.C.?
Yeah, that
can't happen.
No.
That cannot. She needs a new hobby. She's done playing politician. She needs to go do something else.
Yeah, I think we can clearly see the problems with her not listening to parents, and I think this is going to get worse before it gets better. New York is a year ahead of us. They began testing a year ago, and it's just exploded. The thousands and thousands of parents refusing to let their kids take this test.
I agree.
Speaking volumes.
Well, I thank you for being on my show. Folks, this is something you need to look into. Get online, check the Common Core standards, talk to your children, talk to their teachers, talk to the administrator, the principal. This needs to be taken out of New Hampshire. I thank you for watching tonight. Check back again next week for another show, another episode. Good night and God bless.